So today I want to talk to you about integrating across the employee lifecycle. Now this one's actually quite an exciting one because of all the things when you're stuck and you don't know where to take the evolutionary community next. This is one of those things, if you learn how to think in this way, often has some significant insight. So it's important. So what's ideal? Well, essentially when you're looking at the employee lifecycle from recruiting to onboarding, performance, learning and succession and eventually to exit, it's about how can we use social to facilitate this process over time. That's what we're talking about today. So it's an integrated part of the employee's life cycle. So what's ideal? Well, ideally, we want to have a continuity of use across the life cycle from onboarding to departure, right? So it provides a connected experience from the second we walk in to the way we develop our skills over time, and then eventually to the moment we leave, or even perhaps beyond, right? And we want to see that succession and knowledge retention just become a natural part of how we work within our community. And our learning becomes expedited through identifiable communities of practice over time, okay? So if you're looking at the capabilities that the organization is trying to develop, you can see that they've been visibly progressed by the activity that's happening inside the community itself. So how do you know if it needs work? Well, essentially, aspects of the employee life cycle are missing. So maybe it's totally missing, or certain parts of it aren't there, or maybe it's not particularly well done, right? So when you're looking at onboarding, perhaps the new starters don't have an allocated group that they can join. That could be an onboarding group, or it could be a team group that they go to. Employees don't have a place to go to develop their core skills and capabilities with others. So there might be some big education programs, but and people are attending that, but God forbid that it gets mentioned in the social network, right? So key education programs are largely missed within the community, or they might be spoken about, but there's no dedicated group to actually progress as a practice or develop it as a practice within the organization, right? Or the other thing to look for is perhaps your induction materials, training materials don't actually mention enterprise social network at all. So these are the things that we're looking for. So if you think about the employee life cycle and the needs to onboard, to build networks, to develop capabilities, to start to develop succession, and then to leave, we want to see that this process has been honoured or facilitated by the activity in our social community. So what's the impact to the community if we don't get this right? Well, essentially, users start to have this sense of fragmented progression, right? It's not unified. They're not connecting with others that are on the same journey. So their incentive decreases, their momentum behind their progression decreases. And so the development of critical capabilities often starts to occur within the shadows. It's not in plain sight. Often too, social remains disconnected from the activities that we're then performing every day, and that's not a good thing. Again, the whole thing about integration is that it's blended. We stumble into it. It becomes harder for new starters to connect. Our ties between each other become weaker as a result, and recruiting and developing capability actually becomes a lot harder over time. So if you think about succession planning and all these kinds of things, suddenly we're less able to do that. So by honouring our employee life cycle and looking at how social can facilitate that, we actually get a much more robust, much more dynamic and actually progressive sort of culture that's happening in the organisation. And without it, again, we become largely hobbled, right? So this is a really important one. What are the causes? Well, usually it's about poor planning, it's around poor governance, and it's around poor education, right? So it's just people it's either ignorance, they don't know about it, or they're lazy, they don't want to do it. But it's these things. They're too busy is another one. Sorry, I'm too busy working to make life easier for myself. These are the things that we often hear. So how do we respond? Well, firstly, I recommend mapping the employee life cycle. So from the onboarding piece, it's the capabilities that you're developing, the teams worked with, right? The partners worked with even externally, why not? And then your offboarding process, get that mapped, get good visibility across what that looks like. And then you can start to look at, well, what's missing and what do we need to build out, right? I'd also recommend looking to form some specific activities support the different aspects of the life cycle. So that can be around groups, it can also be around hashtags, right? So if there's certain capabilities that you want to develop, why not develop a language of hashtagging to start to facilitate and bring these conversations to life? The other parts to look at, if you're developing capabilities, making sure you're integrating events and those sorts of things as well. It becomes a very powerful way to get momentum fast. The other one is start to track and progress use over time through your governance group. It's highly likely that like we're talking about succession planning, right? So what often happens is we set these things up, we have a group of people that are really gung-ho about maintaining it, but then it dies over time whenever they leave or they move on, whatever happens, right? So if you've got making sure that your governance function is robust as part of this process, and this is something they focus on periodically, keeps it top of mind, brings it to the surface, gets it worked on over time, particularly as things change, right? Particularly around education. Now, a few tips as you're going through this process. Firstly, work with the teams that own the different parts of the process. Don't try and do it all yourself. So if you're doing onboarding, work with HR. Yeah. If you're doing offboarding, perhaps work with HR as well. Use groups to onboard grads and interns. So this is a really good one, right? So if you're bringing grads on, you can have an external group. You can have them go into the group before they've actually begun work. This allows them to answer their own questions, or for you guys to answer questions en masse. So you're not doing the same thing multiple times. But the other thing it allows them to do is allows them to come to work with a network already. And that's a really powerful one. I highly recommend just an external group for grads. External groups for alumni can also be really interesting. So when they leave, and it's dependent on whether you do this on your own network or if you do it through LinkedIn, for instance, but maintaining a network of alumni is really powerful because it actually means that you can market to them and you recruit from them. They already know your culture. You already know their capability. The risk of recruiting from alumni is actually quite decreased, so you might as well use it for that. When onboarding too, have new starters have their manager post a welcome and an introduction. It's a really powerful thing to do, but it brings them into the organization, makes them feel welcome, allows people to know who they are so they can come up and talk. So when they start, have their manager post an update as to who they are, what they're about, maybe even with a photo. Also look for key areas in the organization is seeking to develop and begin a community of practice around that. So it can be leadership, those sorts of things. And lastly, map user pains against the journey. So if you've mapped this life cycle, start to look at where are the big pain points for users as they're transitioning through that. And that can be building communities or building responses to those things can be a really powerful way to add value from day one. Hope you found that useful. If you want to join the conversation or find out more information, we've got a lot more programs at biddleaccelerator.com, or you can reach out to me through Twitter. My name is Scott. Hope you had a great day. Thanks, guys.